Този учен намира метод за лекуване на рак, но бързо след това бива наречен измамник. Той твърди, че с помощта на вибрации успява да атакува заразените клетки, без да засяга здравите тъкани. Това е историята на човек, който според някой е открил лечение за всички смъртоносни болести. Ройъл Райф е роден през 1888 година в САЩ. Докато другите деца си играли навън, той разглобявал механизми и създавал свои собствени апарати. Това любопитство го отвежда в света на микроскопията, наука, която в началото на 20 век е била в своя разцвет. Райф е вярвал, че ако може да видиш как всъщност работи една болест, то би трябвало да можеш да я победиш. През 20-те години на миналия век Райф създава универсалния микроскоп. Устройство толкова мощно, че според него е можело да видиш живи вируси в реално време. Това е нещо, което и днес е трудно да се направи, дори с модерни технологии. Но Райф не спира до тук. Докато наблюдавал вирусите, той започнал да експериментира с честоти. Открил, че всяка болест има собствена смъртоносна честота, вибрация, която може да я унищожи, без да вреди на здравите клетки. Той нарича това Beam Ray Machine. Устройство, което е използвало електромагнитни вълни, за да унищожава болести. За да добиете представа какво точно е постигнал, чуйте с негови думи. Ако искате да продължите да слушате историята, просто превъртете. Посочил съм в плеера точно къде може да се превърти, но нещата, които казва, са изключително важни.
Now these organisms again, before we go farther, they cannot be stained with the aniline or acid dye stains that's used in the ordinary technique and method of staining tissue sections or even bacteria. Now those organisms are so minute and so delicate that they have to be stained with a frequency of light. Now, after we built our first high-powered microscope, we had to build an illuminant unit to be able to see these different types of organisms and different types of tissue also. So, we had to build this particular unit. We built a unit which I have a patent on, special lamp that will produce 2,000 candle power on a needlepoint of beam where it comes through the condenser. But between this source of illumination and the so-called substage condenser, we have a pair. On the universal microscope we have 4, but we use a pair of rotating wedge-shaped quartz prism. They're circular and they're wedge-shaped. And by rotating those, we bend the beam of light, that's what we term the neutral or core beam of the illuminant unit, at different angles of incidence, so that it strikes the object under examination at different angles of refraction. There we see these particles at a different refractive index, and every one of them is entirely different. I changed them at different temperatures. I had no results. I was running at that time possibly 400 transfers a day, and determining the effect that the argon, neon, and krypton gas, using as a bombardment in a loop, would have upon the growth of pathogenic bacteria. We wanted to determine if it would stimulate or retard the growth. I was running those things through, as I say, 400 and 500 transfers a day. And there was a vacant tube, a loop that was standing, and this one tube that I had with this malignant tissue in was standing on the bench along there, and it might just as well had a red flag on it. So I picked this thing up and I dropped it in this argon loop. I left it for 24 hours till I was making my transfers the next day, and I looked at it. I saw that it had a cloudiness in it, which it did not have before. Well, I examined it immediately under the microscope, and I found nothing. And I chemically analyzed it, and I found out that it had been ionized by this bombardment of this 5,000 volts in this argon loop. So there's only one counteraction of ionization, that's oxidation. So I put it in a 2-inch water bath, a 2-inch vacuum, and left it in the incubator for 24 hours. And I brought it out, and it had changed again. And I immediately put it under the microscope and began rotating my prisms, and I finally found it alive and teeming with one of the smallest of any of the filterable forms we had yet seen, in a purplish-red refraction under the monochromatic light. They were less than a 20th of a micron in dimensions.
Doc, would you mention the polarity that you encountered with these viruses under the microscope?
Well, some of these particular organisms, not only the virus, but many of the pathogenic organisms have an individual polarity. Now, we have tested those out, and we find that the positive organism will not associate with the negative organism. We show that where we use a 1/1,000,000th of a volt under the slide in our hanging drop, and some of the organisms will come to one side and some the other. Now, for instance, in the case we get back to the BX, that is a bipolar organism. It is susceptible partial of it to one pole and some to the other. We showed a negative pole, and many of the modal organisms will come to that pole. We showed a positive pole, and the rest of them that are modal and swimming will go to the other pole. Well, we go in with the micromanipulator with our micropipette, and we draw off from this drop the negative side. We transmit that into the animal, and we have no malignant growth. Now, we have found, experimenting with these different types of so-called malignant bacteria, that some are susceptible to an acid and some to a different types of base. They're positive or negative, alkaline or acid. Some bacteria are susceptible to the acid type and some to the reverse. But we believe that an individual that has an absolute neutral metabolism is susceptible to no disease, because we can take, and we have repeated this experiment not once but hundreds of times in the laboratory with very careful and positive technique, that we place 3 test tubes, 1 acid, 1 alkaline. The center tube is a neutral pH. There is not an organism in the whole category of so-called pathogens will grow on that neutral pH. And as I say, it depends entirely upon the acidity or alkalinity of the organism of which we wish to grow. To make a pure culture of these organisms, especially the virus, it is a very technical, long drawn-out process. Some of them are so-called anaerobic, and some of them are oxaerobic. Some of them require oxygen, such as the BX requires oxygen in one stage of its form to grow. To take the poliomyelitis is strictly anaerobic. That has to be developed in a media that is absolutely free from air. But we run through a series of those organisms in the filterable state, and we found definitely that the rat, the soil, and the human leprosy in the filterable stage was identical with one another. We never attempted to transmit any of these organisms. Dr. Walker had them there after we isolated them, but we run them through, and we found out over a period of a long series of research that they were identical in the filterable state. It's a very interesting organism, and we have devitalized under electrical application the leprosy, the organism, both in the rod and the filterable state. It is in the human form. Now, we have gone through, as I say, I have worked at this work for over 50 years. So, we inoculate the premoidal cell into the animal, and we produce the disease in 1/10 the actual time that we produce by the inoculation of the organism. And we sincerely believe, as stated before, that it is the chemical reaction of those viruses upon the unbalanced cell metabolism that produces a disease, because we can produce, in most instances, all the symptoms of the disease chemically with no bacteria.
През 1943 година в Калифорния е проведен експеримент. 16 пациента с диагноза терминален рак били лекувани с машината на Райф. Тогава е свикана комисия, която да оцени лечението след 90 дни. След 3 месеца 14 от тях били напълно излекувани. Останалите двама се възстановили малко по-късно, но тук започва мракът. Машината на Райф привлича вниманието на лекари и учени, но не и на големите фармацевтични компании. Според множество свидетелства, човек на име Морис Фишбейн, тогавашния глава на Американската медицинска асоциация, опитва да купи правата върху изобретението, но Райф отказва. Малко след това, лабораторията му мистериозно изгаря в пожар. Документите и машините са унищожени. Свидетели твърдят, че негови партньори започнали да изчезват и някои от тях са умирали мистериозно, или пък негови колеги се отричали напълно от думите си. Малко по-късно Райф е съден за нелицензирана медицинска практика. След това машините му биват конфискувани. След десетилетия натиск, съдебни дела и финансови удари, Ройъл Райф умира през 1971 година в бедност и неизвестност. Неговото изобретение е изтрито официално от историята, но през 80-те години документи, чертежи и свидетелства започват да излизат отново. Някои дори твърдят, че неговите принципи са основата на модерни терапии като биорезонанс и експериментални честотни терапии. Историята на Райф звучи като класическа конспирация. Гениален изобретател, който открива лек за всичко, но е унищожен от големите корпорации. Факт е обаче, че документи за неговата работа съществуват, а много независими учени твърдят, че е бил пионер в честотната терапия. Но другата страна твърдят, че експериментите му никога не са били доказани по научен път. Истината е може би някъде по средата. Ройъл Райф безспорно е бил изключителен ум и неговите идеи вдъхновяват хиляди изследователи и до днес. Но остава въпроса, дали той наистина е открил лечение за рак или историята му е поредната легенда, родена от човешката надежда за чудо.